am currently halfway through one of the last books on my 24 reads for 2024. Yeah, we're getting closer to the end of the year, and I really don't want to leave any of them unfinished. In fact, there are 4.5 books to go. So yay! I collected various genres this year, but I also chose some pretty chunky reads, more for me. Something I am now discovering was a bit of a mistake. As I predicted in the other Bennett Sister episode a few weeks ago, I did indeed head in the direction of a Jilly Cooper reread, as well as the cozy crime novel that I'd recently received. And I know I say this every single episode, but I am not sure where the year is going. We're more than halfway through November as I record this, and less than 6 weeks from the end of the year. For me, that means it's time to start thinking about New Year reading ambitions, setting my 25 for 2025, and contemplating another very necessary unhaul. I do know that as well as picking new books from the shelf, I want to include a few rereads. I've only done 3 this year, which feels sort of sad when I consider the number of books I've got on my shelf that I actually love. Anyhow, less of these ramblings, and please excuse the fact that I sound rather nasal. I have got the chest infection that just won't go away. Let's get on with the book talk for this week. Here I am, no spoilers, as opinion-filled as ever and ready to roll, all of which means it's time for the latest episode of Being Bookish. This week I am going to be travelling quite a bit. LA, Argentina, Gloucestershire, as I follow our leading lady from disobedient teen to confused young adult. If you've managed to guess from that what I'm talking about, then you're clearly a fan of Jilly Cooper's Rutshire Chronicles. If you don't know, then I'll tell you. This week I am talking about Polo, the story of Perdita MacLeod. I'm your host, Ray, self-confessed bookworm, introvert, hermit, and long-term depression sufferer. Join me on my journey through my ever-growing to-be-read pile and enjoy the latest of my 100% spoiler-free book reviews. I have to be honest, I have actually read most of the Rutshire Chronicles, though the most recent 2, Mount and Tackle, haven't made it onto my shelves, either Kindle or physical, as I'm not a massive fan of the mechanics of football, and Dame Jilly is a huge fan of research and including a considerable amount of detail. That may go some way to explaining my reluctance as far as Tackle is concerned. However, I'm not talking about the later books in the series today. I am talking about one of the earliest. Polo was released in 1991, 3 years after the very well-received Rivals, and it acts, in a strange way, almost like a bridging novel, starting before Rivals begins and ending after it's finished. So if you want to know what happened after the announcement that Taggy and Rupert are getting married, or between the moment where Rupert finishes riding in the Olympics and becomes an MP, then this is the book that should be your go-to. Ricky France Lynch was moody, macho and magnificent. He had a large crumbling estate, a 9-goal polo handicap and a beautiful wife who was fair game for anyone with a checkbook. He also had the adoration of 14-year-old Perdita MacLeod. Perdita couldn't wait to leave her dreary school and become a polo player. The polo set were ritzy, wild and gloriously promiscuous. Perdita thought she'd get along with them very well. But before she had time to grow up, Ricky's life exploded into tragedy, and Perdita turned into a brat who loved only her horses, and Ricky France Lynch. Ricky's obsession to win back his wife, and Perdita's to win both Ricky and a place as a top-class polo player, take the reader on a wildly exciting journey to the estancias of Argentina, to Palm Beach and Deauville, and on to the royal polo fields of England and the glamorous pitches of California, where the most heroic battle of all is destined to be fought. A match that is about far more than just the winning of a huge silver cup. As with many of Dame Jilly's novels, Polo is a bit of a tome, almost 800 pages, and it certainly earns the title of bonkbuster, with plenty of extramarital affairs, young and nubile mistresses, eager teens looking to grow up quickly, and energetic, beautiful men who can woo any woman into their bed. Though you would be forgiven for believing that the novel is all about Ricky France Lynch, his relationships and his career aspirations, because of the blurb on the back of the book, it is really about 14-year-old Perdita MacLeod. As I've already mentioned, Polo is sort of like a bridge, starting not long after the end of Riders, with a young pre-politics Rupert Campbell-Black, and ending just a couple of years after the end of Rivals. Obviously, the events we are familiar with from Rivals are viewed from a very different perspective, because the characters in that novel are not the central characters in Polo. Still, it's interesting as someone who reread both books recently to see how they are handled. The book starts with an example of Perdita's rebelliousness. She's at an exclusive boarding school sitting an exam when she simply gets up and walks out. What can possibly be more interesting and important than her education? Why, it's Polo, of course. She leaves to go and watch Ricky France Lynch playing a match at a nearby club. And this is our introduction to many of the important players in the book: Ricky, Drew, Suki, Chessie, and the exuberant Carlyle brothers. Of course, Perdita's escapades don't go without punishment, giving us a little insight into the rather toxic home life Perdita has, though it's subtle at first. That having been said, even worse events are soon to occur in the form of an unfaithful wife, a child's death, and someone being sentenced to 2 years in prison. Ricky is understandably devastated when his wife leaves him for wealthy Bart Alderton, his boss, more because she's taken their 4-year-old son, Will, with her. The little vibrant boy is the light of both his parents' lives, and Ricky is devastated when he realises what he's done. His son, the victim, when Ricky loses control of his car. While Ricky is punishing himself more than the prison system possibly can, the world is moving on without him. Perdita has grown more rebellious, making her mother the subject of her persistent ire. Though she was less than happy at her private school, doing everything she could to get kicked out, after her parents separate, she is the only one of the MacLeod children sent to a local comprehensive and treated like a pariah. She doesn't fit in. She believed all her life that her father had died, leaving Daisy young, alone and pregnant. When she becomes even more difficult when her younger sister Violet tells her that her mother didn't even know who Perdita's father was, something that her father shared the information on. This revelation is what sets Perdita down an even more destructive path, furious at her mum for lying to her all her life, resentful of the fact that her siblings were aware of this when she wasn't, and possibly humiliated at the fact that she had to find out the way she did. Perdita makes sure that Daisy knows how angry she is and how much she wishes she had been adopted by a couple. In prison, Ricky is trying to get by and makes a friend in Dancer Maitland, the lead singer of rock band Apocalypse, and serving time to cover up for someone else's drug deals. While sharing a cell, the two grow close, and Dancer begins to not only fall in love with Ricky, but the game of polo, building a passion for the sport through Ricky's own love of it. Upon his release, Ricky has nothing else on his mind but getting his wife back, so he is understandably livid when he witnesses an unknown girl riding one of his prized polo ponies. Who gave her permission? Who is she? And where did she come from? On finding out that someone has let out one of his properties on his land to Daisy MacLeod and her family, Ricky is less than impressed. Despite this, and maybe possibly because of it, he offers Perdita a job at his stables, as long as she starts to obey her mother and show her the respect she deserves. Perdita is on cloud 9. She is close to Ricky and sees this as an opportunity to seduce him. Does it work? No. She's still infatuated and sees him as someone she can save from his tortured past. This crush is what drives her ultimately to succeed, and it also makes her, sadly, a bit of a brat, treating everyone around her as though they're crap. The problem is that she's really good at polo, and she knows it. While Perdita is pushing to become the best female polo player anyone has ever seen, Daisy is embarking on her own adventure. A talented artist whose career played second fiddle to her husband's own ambitions, she is finally painting again. She has also started a passionate affair with Drew Benedict, one of Ricky's ex-teammates and an ex-airman who flew in the Falklands War, which is something that's kind of close to the timeline as this book is based in the early to late 80s. This particular fact may not seem pertinent now, but it does soon become evident that his role in the Falklands War is an important plot point for certain characters. Dancer returns to the scene with ambitions to become not only a great polo player, but also the finance behind Ricky's ambitions. And soon Ricky is seemingly back on track. Cressy has issued him a challenge, promising she will return to him if he achieves specific, seemingly impossible polo goals. And now he is headed to Argentina with a resentful Perdita, who will learn more in her time at Alejandro Mendoza's stables than anywhere else. At Alejandro's, she meets Angel, a vengeful Argentinian pilot turned talented rider, Luke Alderton, Bart's son from his first marriage, and falls in love with Tero, a perfect polo pony who loves her right back, something she needs. From Argentina, Perdita heads to LA, where Luke introduces her to his family, his father Bart, his sister Bibi, and his younger brother Red. She also meets up with Chessie again, though she is still angry at the other woman for breaking Ricky's heart. The path of true love never did run smooth, and that is certainly the case where Perdita is concerned, for she falls in love with the wrong Alderton brother. While Luke is desperate for Perdita to see him as more than a friend, she is growing infatuated with the narcissistic and pretty horrific human being that is Red Alderton. Back in England, Daisy continues her affair with Drew, sure that she is the only woman in his life but for his wife Suki, though her hopes are dashed when she finds out that he's not quite the honest man she believed him to be. Perdita is living in a love daze. She is so obsessed with Red and will do anything he asks of her, up to and including hurting Ricky, cutting off all her hair and destroying a deal that Ventura TV had to follow her career. And this is where we re-meet up with Rupert Campbell-Black, his beloved Taggy, and the other people who appeared in Rivals. Rupert is trying desperately to save Ventura and the deal they had with Perdita following her career as a female polo player, and he is understandably furious and determined to destroy the young girl when Taggy trips and falls and loses their baby while he is in America. The scene in the hotel room is just beyond belief. Rivals and Polo have now overlapped. This is where Perdita's life starts to fall apart. She has become worse than she ever was before, pushing people aside in favour of a man who loves himself more than he could ever love anyone else. However, it isn't until she discovers the sort of person Red really is, and her whole life falls apart, that she starts to find herself again. Of course, a lot more happens than that, including the revelation that Perdita tried to bed her biological father, Ricky finds a new true love and her name isn't Chessie, and Perdita realises that the man who loved her all along truly holds the key to her heart. Yep, that's corny. As with every single Jilly Cooper, there is a little bit of resolution, but you are still left to watch as the end scene fades to black. While the popularity of Rivals has picked up considerably over the last few months, with pre-release and post-release press for the Disney Plus series dominating magazines, newspapers and TV, Polo has not yet felt the reflection of its glory. I have to be honest, I am hoping that this will change, but for now I have to use what is already there, which is sparse. I had to use a different tack when searching for a more detailed 1-star review on Polo. Not that there weren't a number of 1-star ratings, there just weren't the same number or quality of written reviews. I ended up going to Goodreads, then started following links within short one-liners. This 1-star review is from someone who was definitely more interested in horse pursuits. Christine said, "Not appropriate for kids. Too much smut. Too little horses. I decided to remove this fictional piece from my library, finding the focus to be a lot more on the interrelationships between the players and rich characters that surrounded the sport. This wouldn't have been a concern if the writing didn't go into so much smutty detail. It's hardly a book I'd want a teen or younger horse fanatic to be reading. Nor would I want one to be interested in polo and stumble across this book expecting to learn about the sport. For me, reading the book once was enough." Now, I know that books have become larger for children and teens and tweens, looking at books like Order of the Phoenix and Twilight as an example. However, since when would a cover that contains a man in polo trousers and a woman clutching at his crotch be considered something that a child or teenager would pick up and go, "Oh, well, that says polo on the cover. I think this would be a really good book to read about the sport." Anyway, I'm all too aware that Jilly Cooper's Rutshire Chronicles, especially the early books, are experiencing something of a renaissance right now, thanks to Rivals. That said, this book has been on my shelf since 1992, and I have reread it a few times since I first purchased it when it was new. As much as I love the story in Rivals and Rupert Campbell-Black as a character, every single time I read Polo, I find myself wishing that we saw more of Perdita and Luke in the books that follow this one, and you'll understand why if you know the biggest twist. Luckily, or in this instance not that luckily, I was unable to find that many 1-star reviews for Polo. To be fair, there aren't that many reviews for the book across any platform, but then it is one that came before the advent of the online review site, so it still needs to catch up with other newer books, because it certainly has the audience, and I am positive that if the TV series is renewed, there will definitely be more interest in Perdita. As I always say when it comes to reviews, opinions are incredibly personal, and it's far more obvious with some books than with others. On Goodreads, the overall rating for this book is 4.20, and on Storygraph it's 3.88. I have to admit that I am surprised at how much lower the score is on Storygraph. The reviews aren't so explanatory on Storygraph, as the site gives reviewers more opportunities to submit their feelings without actually writing a full review, so it's difficult to know quite why in all cases. While this is great if you're in a hurry, as I so often am to be fair, it doesn't make it easy to write a summary. Polo was first released in hardback in 1991, 33 years ago. Wow. Okay, I'm not feeling old or anything. And the paperback followed, as is traditional, around a year later in 1992. At present, it has 4,770 ratings and 145 written reviews. Out of that pool, 68% or 3,775 readers gave it a positive 4 or 5-star rating, which is great. At the other end of the spectrum, 4%, 222 reviewers didn't enjoy Polo or didn't find it as intriguing as other books and gave it a 1 or 2-star rating. I think the interesting thing is with some of the ratings and reviews on the lower end of the scale is that people still liked the book, they just didn't rate it highly. The interestingly named Dark Draco gave the book 5 stars, enjoying every moment of the bonkbuster. They said, "Ricky France Lynch has 3 passions in his life: Polo, his son William, and his wife Chessie. But when Chessie leaves him and his game suffers, he turns to drink and tries to persuade her back. Tragedy strikes and he ends in jail. Meanwhile, Perdita sulks through her school. All she wants is to be a polo player, marry her hero Ricky, and become very rich. Her home life is suffering, her stepfather is having an affair and walks out. Her mother Daisy isn't coping well on her own and is on the point of giving up. Perdita ends up working for Ricky, learning polo in America, Argentina, and England, while Chessie offers Ricky an ultimatum, setting him 3 tasks that he must complete before she return. As Ricky stresses over her, Perdita falls in and out of love and lust, and Daisy slowly falls apart. The novel slowly builds up to a great outcome. Another great read, loads of rich and powerful people getting up to all sorts. The return of Rupert Campbell-Black is cool, as is the continuation of his and Taggy's story from Rivals, even if it is a bit sad. I remember I was blown away by his links with Perdita when I first read this book many moons ago. Really enjoyable. Can't wait to read the next one. In days gone by, I had a lot more books that could be classed as bonkbusters on my shelf. Everything from Jilly Cooper to Judith Krantz, Shirley Conran, Jackie Collins, and early Danielle Steele, though obviously later books by that author are not considered that any longer. Those days are gone, but the early Rutshire Chronicles have remained my loyal and faithful companions, though the characters certainly aren't. I have read most of them. The first 3 remain my favourites. It's not that I didn't enjoy the latter books, Up to Jump, which was released in 2010. I just found that the earlier ones introduced me to more characters I love and want to read about. Seriously, I want to read more about Perdita and Luke. Mostly Perdita. Anyway, now I have told you about other people's views, let's get down to it. Here are my thoughts on Polo by Jilly Cooper, completely spoiler-free and 100% honest, as always. Did I like the book? This book is definitely a product of its time. Though I have to be honest, I was never in the set that went to watch Polo. I am definitely not of that class. When I was 14, I was working on my GCSEs, reading books from the controlled cupboard at school. Did anyone else have one of those? The reward cupboard, where books that weren't considered necessarily appropriate were placed, and it was considered, if you were good enough, you were able to get the key and go and pick one from a specific shelf. Or was it just our school that did that? And I had posters of River Phoenix and Michael J. Fox on my wall. Okay, and Ralph Macchio and Corey Haim, and I think I even had one of Josh Brolin at one point. But yeah, I think I even had Sean Astin. But anyhow, we're getting way off topic here. I couldn't have told you the name of a single polo player if you asked me. Obviously, Perdita and I are from completely different classes, but interestingly, her emotions on the page are very teenage, making her just a tiny bit relatable. I was 16 when I read this book for the first time, and the idealised romantic vision that Perdita had of her life with her crush is definitely familiar. In fact, it's probably familiar to girls the world over. Actually, not only girls. Oh, I'm just going to marry Christy Brinkley. Okay, I'm really dating myself here. But that's the way that I think a crush works. You see them, you imagine your life with them, even though they are 10,000 miles away and so far out of your reach. It is beyond belief. Anyway, I want to talk about this book. Mostly, I picked it up because I'd reread Rivals, I'd watched the TV show, and for some reason in my mind, I just wanted to revisit Perdita and Angel and Alejandro and Luke and just get that feeling back that I'd had the first time I read the book. I know that you can't do that. You will read a book and the feeling you have the first time you read it is very different to the feeling you have the second, third, fourth time, because there are certain elements of the characters that you are going to be familiar with. There are certain elements of surprise that you're no longer going to have because the twist is already been unveiled. I think the primary twist in this is there is a moment in the book where Luke has been injured, and I'm jumping around up, down and everywhere else. Luke has been injured and he looks at Perdita and he says to her, I've just realised I know who your father is, because Perdita doesn't know. And that moment is the moment that sets everything in motion. But it is so impactful. I think that the way that Rivals has done things, and though this is not about Rivals, this is about Polo. I think the way that Rivals has done certain things in the show, and I will get into that in a video I'm still working on because I'm still rather ill, has raised some questions about how Polo would be managed or handled were it to be brought into the Disney Plus fold. Perdita is an unusual character. She is described as being unique, beautiful, but unique. And to me, that brings to mind Anya Taylor-Joy. There is something about her that is very sleek and refined and beautiful, but in a unique way. She's different, but still stunning. And in fact, when I reread when I reread Polo this time around, I saw Anya Taylor-Joy as an older Perdita. In the book, she starts off, she's 14 years old. She's a rebel. She hates her school life. She is constantly made aware of the fact that she isn't really her stepfather's daughter. And because of this, the dynamic at home is uncomfortable, especially when I feel very sorry for Perdita's mother, Daisy. When her mother-in-law comes to stay, her husband, Hamish, spends more time out of the home or pandering to his mother's wishes than he does considering the fact that his wife is treated like rubbish by his mother. And his oldest daughter, the child that he was raising as his own, is treated even more like an outcast. Perdita doesn't do herself any favours. She is very forthright in her opinions on her grandmother MacLeod, and her own mother's feelings don't help in bonding these two people together. Of course, when Hamish leaves Daisy for his secretary Wendy, and there's so much foreshadowing on this, it's unbelievable. When Hamish leaves Daisy for Wendy, his mother is over the moon because not only did she think that Daisy wasn't good enough for her son, she treated her as though she wasn't good enough. So Daisy always felt inadequate. And this is something that was passed down to Perdita, but not the other two MacLeod children, who are Hamish and Daisy's biological children. I felt really bad for Perdita when I read the dynamics of the relationship between her stepfather, and his mother, because she was always made to feel like an outcast, like the one who wasn't worthy. So a lot of her behaviour, while it's not excusable, is understandable. Then we get to other characters in the book, and every single one of them has massive flaws. There's not one character in the book who you can look at and say, without a shadow of a doubt, they are really lovely. Chessie is described as gorgeously beautiful, but she is immoral as anything. She sleeps with anyone who, as the book says, has a checkbook, and she leaves her husband at a vulnerable time, knowing that the man she's leaving him for is about to fire him from his polo team, mostly because he wants to sleep with Chessie. And she is heartless. There are certain moments where you know that she is doing things just to punish Ricky, such as taking their son, Will. Because whenever you see an interaction between Will and Chessie early on in the book, before the child dies, which is horrible, she is so dismissive of him. Did you bring me a present? No. Are you going to do this? No. Wait until your daddy gets home. She doesn't like anything about her life. So why she didn't just file for divorce instead of humiliating him, I will never know. This entire area is a hotbed of infidelity, as you will have noticed from Rivals with Cameron Cook and Tony Baddingham and Baz Baddingham and Declan, though we don't have that bit yet, and Rupert Campbell-Black and Sarah Stratton, and every single person on the planet seems to be sleeping with everybody else's wives. or husbands. And this book is no different. We have Drew. Drew is an ex-airman from during the Falklands War. He is married to Suki, who is described as horsey. And I don't know if that's because she's of the horsey set or if she has a horse-like appearance. She is money. Drew needed money. He married her. Suki and Drew seem to have a rather balanced relationship until Drew and Daisy start having an affair. Drew is one of Perdita's coaches on the junior polo team, and he does his best to get Perdita to achieve and accomplish things and tries to get her to behave and adhere to the rules. He's not very good at it, but he does his best. Daisy is attracted to this. She's been alone for a while now. Her ex-husband has left her with literally nothing and swanned off to LA with his new wife. And then they have another baby. So she's now got her 2 children with Hamish to deal with, who are finding things really difficult to adjust to. And she's got Perdita, who is not behaving as she really needs her to. So Daisy falls into a long-term extramarital relationship with Drew and believes him to really care for her. He keeps on telling her, there's no love lost between me and Suki. We're just together because we have the house and I need the money and everything else, which doesn't make it a really good justification. But anyway, and then Suki comes to her, and I don't know if you never do get the actual true vibe about Suki. You don't know if she knows that Daisy and Drew have been having an affair, or if she is there to confide in her because she doesn't have anyone else to talk to. But she tells her this story about how she knows her husband has been sleeping with other women and he's never been faithful and he has a number of mistresses, and she knows that he was spending money on someone. And then Daisy's sitting there thinking, but that wasn't something he bought for me and it wasn't for something he bought for her. So who else is he sleeping with? And she starts to realise that she was on a massively self-destructive path because she was lonely and isolated. Her children were off doing their own thing. Her husband had left her and made her feel inadequate. And her mother-in-law, her ex-mother-in-law, had made her feel awful the entire time her and Hamish had been together. So it's interesting to see the dynamics between these people. But at the same time, you don't sit there going, I really like you. Really think you're amazing. Even Luke, who is probably the purest after Taggy. In fact, I'd say that Luke is this book's Taggy. Even Luke has got some questionable qualities. Yes, he is madly in love with Perdita and he doesn't tell her. But he also, when he first starts feeling these things towards her, he's got a long-term girlfriend who he has been stringing along for years. The fact that he moves on when Perdita and Red get involved is fair enough, but he still holds a torch for Perdita, and you feel quite bad for any girl he gets involved with at this point because you know that he's in love with her. But I still can't help loving the fact that these 2 people have so many things in common. There's so many things to bond them. And it's not until one or other of them are not available, as is always the case, it seems, that they start to feel or acknowledge their feelings. Now, there are a lot of things that happen in this book. It's that there are so many plots that intertwine, that mesh together, that seem to make no sense. But the biggest heartbreaking moment for me, yes, Will's death was horrific. And reading about poor, I know it sounds awful. You have to say poor Ricky because he is devastated at the mess that he has caused. And he has to live with it. But at the same time, it's like, you didn't need to drive drunk. You were angry. You confronted your wife, and then you kidnapped your son. Those things you can never justify. But the moment for me that actually had me in tears was when Perdita's horse Tero dies of a heart attack while Red is riding her to the point where she cannot cope. That is the moment where everything shifts. Your entire perspective on her as a character shifts, despite the fact that she's been in this relationship with Red and it seems to have been destructive from the word go. It is the moment you realise that she is truly not prepared for anything is when Tero collapses and her entire life shatters. She's destroyed other people's lives along the way. She's hurt her friends. She's betrayed them. She's destroyed her mother. Not physically, obviously, but mentally has destroyed her mother. And she has hurt everybody. She has denigrated, degraded, destroyed, all the D words. She's done all of these things. And then you see her as this 21-year-old girl who is heartbroken because her horse has just died. And it's as though you realise at that moment that the only thing she really does care about is her animals. That's the only thing she really has that is a constant in her life. Her stepfather never wanted her and makes it clear that she's not welcome. Her step-grandmother treats her like a pariah. Her mother is trying but isn't enough. The man she's had a crush on for a decade isn't interested in her and sees her as a child because realistically she is one. Her biological father isn't interested and treats her in the way that actually she deserves for what she did to his family. And then along comes Taggy, and Taggy takes her under her arm and nurses her almost back to something resembling normality. So, and then along comes Luke again. And we have that moment of realization. And this is why I want more with Luke and Perdita in the books, which you don't get, which is very annoying. But to answer the question, did I like the book? Yes, it's probably, as much as I love Rivals, I think Polo is the one that really pulled me into the Rutshire Chronicles. I'd read Rivals, I'd read Riders, I have both of them, but Polo is the one that I think, because I was almost of a similar age to the main character, I was able to identify with not her situation, obviously, but the emotions that go through you as a teenager. And I think that Jilly Cooper did that quite well, that riotous turmoil, that misunderstanding, that nobody gets me of teenagehood that everybody goes through, but doesn't seem to be written about in a way that is real. It's always for me now, I see it so often with fantasy novels, and we get that whole growth and development, but it's tied in with magic or changing or something else. Whereas with this, it was just emotion after emotion flung on the page. And it was written by a woman who hadn't been a teenager for probably about 40 years at this point. So yeah, I did like it, and I do still like it, and it is one that I'm not going to get rid of. I don't think I'd even replace my copy, which smells, even though my nose is a little bit blocked, I can still smell it. It is like this musky vanilla leather, and even though it's a paperback, it smells amazing. I do love the glue that was used on old books, and that's really the glue and the ink is what makes it smell that way. Oh, and the fact that it's been on a bookcase in the sunshine for probably 20 years. So, themes that make this book. I think the biggest theme in this book, and a number of the books that Jilly Cooper writes, is class prejudice. We know the Polo world is not something that is familiar to everybody. There's been a large debate regarding TV coverage of Polo as per the Netflix documentary that Prince Harry is currently working on, or is due to be released at the end of this month on Netflix. It's the most random thing to have on a streaming service, because it's not something that the everyday person is going to be going, I went and watched a couple of chukkers and then I stood on the divots on the course. It's like, okay. Really? You did? Because it's not something that people normally, well, not normally, I'd say it's not something that the everyday person tends to A, have an interest in, or B, do. The polo world specifically is dominated by wealthy aristocrats, landowners, people of the extreme upper class background, people who've got had a wealthy upbringing, and it is a class thing. So Perdita's background is not necessarily working in her favour. It's unusual. Yes, she does go to a private school. Yes, her stepfather is quite wealthy, but he's a TV producer. He's a first generation wealthy. He's not an aristocratic like Ricky France Lynch or Rupert Campbell-Black. And I know that class does play a massively important part in all of her novels, especially ones like Rivals and Riders, where it was the people who have the money are the ones that can afford to do the show jumping and all of these other things that require land and stables and an incredible amount of time. Perdita is not dismissed because she's working class, because she isn't working class. She's probably middle class. When her father leaves, she becomes impoverished middle class, and she is in the world of the very wealthy. I wouldn't say that Dancer Maitland is working class, but he's not upper class, he's not aristocracy. He is very wealthy because he is talented. And this is something that you come across in a lot of the books. With Riders, you have Jake Lovell, who is a talented jockey, but a talented rider, but he is of a very working class background. And Rupert Campbell-Black makes it incredibly clear from the word go that Jake Lovell is not welcome in his world. Then in Rivals, you have Tony Baddingham, who is not welcome in the world because his father may have been given a title, but he was working class. He grew up in a council estate. He didn't always have the money and the nuance that he does now. And Rupert Campbell-Black again comes in and says, well, I've been wealthy since the word go. My family has an aristocratic background. You may have a title, but I'm an MP for the Tory government, and I have an old family home that's been in my family line for generations and generations. Yours is new. Yet you see the same with Freddie and Valerie Jones when everybody goes, you're nouveau riche. And even Tony Baddingham is bad about it, despite the fact that he's had to pull himself up from his own working class background. He looks at Freddie Jones and says, hey, you're lower than me. And it's this whole pattern, this destructive pattern about class. And though in America, obviously, they don't have the same class system as we do. They don't have the titles, the nobility, the aristocracy that we do. They certainly don't have a monarch. But you can see the evidence of class in the way that the Aldertons treat their staff and they treat their players for the polo team. They come to England to show their wealth. And, oh, look, I've got 25 polo ponies. Probably more than that. So there is this inherent class prejudice within polo and the other books in the Rutshire Chronicles. Another theme is sexism. The way that Perdita is treated because she is a female player who has the aggression of a male player speaks volumes about I'd say the time the novel was written, in 1991, bearing in mind this book is based in the 1980s, there was still a large amount of prejudice towards women in male-dominated arenas. Look at the way that Cameron Cook is treated in Rivals. She is a woman in a man's world. She is a producer. She has power. She's in charge. Yet she is still treated as though she is incompetent. And the same can be said for Perdita. She is the Perdita and Bibi Alderton being Luke and Red's sister and Bart's daughter, only daughter, is described as being not the most beautiful. She is power hungry. She wears pantsuits. She is constantly working, as though that's the only way a woman can succeed. The other women in the book, Chessie, Suki, and I'm trying to think, there's quite a few. Chessie and Suki are primarily the primary characters, but even the wives of people like Alejandro Mendoza, Claudia, they are treated as though they are mere arm decoration. They are not expected to think. Daisy has always been treated with disrespect by her husband and her mother-in-law. And when she has to go out on her own, she doesn't feel as though she's been given any of the tools to cope. So we have this division. You're either hard-nosed and a nightmare to deal with and therefore have no feminine qualities, as Perdita apparently doesn't when Red takes her under his so-called nice wing and seduces her into his bed and then essentially makes her more masculine by cutting off her hair and making her dye it blue and everything else. And yes, he does force her to do these things in the fact that he is manipulating someone who is so unaware of certain elements of the real world, has never been in a relationship before, is totally unaware of the way that he is controlling her and takes it as just this is the way that a relationship is meant to be. You've got Daisy, who is completely unaware of the real world and then tries to find another man in order to help her cope with it. You've got Chessie, who is so feminine and uses her wiles in order to get things. And there's no happy medium. Every single woman has a specific role to play. And finally, both Bibi and Perdita move out of this in a way that is admirable. First off, we have Bibi, who marries a man purely so he can stay in the country because she is furious with her father for trying to get him sent away. Not because they're involved or anything, but because her father is angry at him for losing a match. And it's all about competition and position. And these women eventually move out of their expected roles and they find happiness in not unexpected places, in a place where you should be able to. They prove that you can have a female in power or a female who is good at something that is primarily expected or considered masculine, but they are still female, they are still feminine, they are still respecting the fact that they are women. And I like the fact that she does this, the growth and resilience that she gives these characters eventually, after shoving them into these stereotypical roles in society at that particular time. And it does show how, while there are still expectations on women specifically, we have sort of veered out of that. You don't expect a woman in business to be hook-nosed or horse-nosed, as they refer to poor Bibi, in a pantsuit, uncaring about anything, domineering, overpowerful and intimidating. You don't have to be all of those things to be good at something. And I like the fact that they twist this particular thing on its head, despite the fact they do still have these rather damaging stereotypes in the entire book. If you're looking for something like this, or you loved Polo and want something else, then you will love these. Though I have recently reread a number of Jilly Cooper's books, it's been quite a while since I have enjoyed a soak in the bath with a bonkbuster. Some of these I am recommending because I have read them. Others have been recommended to me, and I may well get to them at some point in the near future. Of course, you could always read Jilly Cooper's other novels, including the first book in the Rutshire Chronicles, Riders, or maybe you prefer The Man Who Made Husbands Jealous. Personally, I prefer Appassionata, which gives us more insight into Rupert's daughter, Tabitha, who is a Spitfire, and it's all based in the music world. There are a few novels in this series that completely focus on opera, classical music, violinists, an observatoire, a conservatoire, I suppose, and a very, very ruthless conductor. I really don't like him. I've always enjoyed Judith Krantz's books, including I'll Take Manhattan and Princess Daisy. Krantz loved to write generational epic bonkbusters that followed a single family and its relationships across the decades. Of course, if you want something slightly newer, Tilly Bagshaw, whose journey to novelist follows a similar path to Jilly Cooper's, is another author who has some dramatic and hot books on this list. Adored, which is filled with scandal and drama, and Showdown, a novel that is more of a romantic saga that has a similar tone to Riders. I'm not sure if it's quite as chunky though. Penny Vincenzi is an author I used to devour in my late teens. Chunky books with beautiful covers, they were the perfect thing, seriously, to sink into when I was too broke to go out on a weekend. Before she sadly died in 2019, Vincenzi published 17 steamic and romantic sagas, including her Spoils of Time trilogy and the very appropriately titled Old Sins, which is probably the first book she wrote and the first book by her that I actually read. The more I think on it, the more authors I come up with. Seriously, there are so many. And though I could spend a while listing every single book, here are some authors for you to just check out their entire back catalogue if you want to add a new bonkbuster to your shelf. Jackie Collins, Fiona Walker, Tasmina Perry, Shirley Conran, whose lace is incredible, and Rebecca Chance. I know I've said it already, but I really can't believe we are halfway through November. The whole doing only one episode every other week thing has kind of thrown me, but it's also meant that I am able to spend far more time reading, which is a massive positive as far as I'm concerned. As I mentioned in a few previous episodes, November marks the first of 2 busy pre-order months. I've already received the first 2 books, one of which I actually ordered right at the beginning of this year, and it ended up being pushed back 3 times before it finally arrived this week. There are 3 more books I am hoping will arrive before the end of the month, and then in December I am waiting for 3 further books, all at the very beginning of the month, fingers crossed. Happy Christmas to me, definitely, because I think that's what I'm going to be doing. I've started not taking my laptop to family things where I'm going to be staying for a few days, instead just taking a couple of books. And it's meant not only do I go to bed feeling far more relaxed, but I also don't have a screen headache, because after a day with the family, sometimes I think everybody finds this when there's a lot of people and a lot of noise, I tend to sink into watching rubbish or just reading fanfic, and then I don't feel like I've achieved anything or accomplished anything. I was honestly quite shocked to realise that I have pre-ordered 4 books that are coming out at various points next year, including the final book in the Fallen Gods series by Hannah Kaner. I really cannot wait to read that last book, but I am really sad to see the series end. I don't think I need to tell you that in March I will be reviewing Faithbreaker. Seriously, it's an amazing title and the cover is stunning. I'm also going to be reading Onyx Storm in January. I've ordered a Barnes & Noble special edition because I missed out on the special from Waterstones by miles. I didn't even realise it was being released. So I missed out on that one and found a copy of the Barnes & Noble edition, which will go quite well with my special edition for Waterstones Fourth Wing, my Fairy Loot special for for the second one for Iron Flame, and now my third one is going to be from Barnes & Noble. But it doesn't matter, they've all got black spines, so that's fine. Well, that's it for this week. I did not expect to be talking for so long, and thank you for listening if you've made it this far. If you like what you hear, why not share it with your friends and family, and please post a star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you might be listening. You can follow me on Instagram as beingbookishpod, on X as being_bookish, and on Blue Sky as being bookish. You can also find these episodes and video content on my YouTube channel, Ray Loves Reading, which can be found using the tag @beingbookishpod. Or if you prefer to read everything, you can find some spoiler-free reviews and my reading tracker for this year, plus all the links to wherever you can find Being Bookish, the podcast, on my website, beingbookish.co.uk. I am just going to head back to the sofa, sit with my book and enjoy the third in this Blood and Ash series by Jennifer L. Armentrout, despite the fact that I really do have other books I should be reading. I just can't help myself. I need to find out what happens with Poppy and Castile, despite the fact that I know that there are 2 more books and I haven't got either of them. So until next time, this is me saying farewell.